Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. Now, that's a little hat that I found, and it almost ended up in the trash, but it looks like a useful dollhouse item, so I rescued it. And this is a little hat that I actually made from watercolor paper. Now, as I mentioned in an earlier video, I have quite a few men dolls in my rooming house, and I need to make accessories to represent their presence. So I found this little black velvet pouch, and I decided to cut it up and use the fabric. And although it's lightweight and it's a good color, it really catches a lot of lint, and I don't particularly like that. But let's see how it goes. So I wrapped it around this cylinder item that I have and used tacky glue to secure the seams. Now you definitely want to be as sparing as possible when you're adding glue to the seams, because the more glue you add in this process, the more glue you'll either have to clean off, and if you can't clean it off, it'll be showing in your finished product. This velvet is very thin and very lightweight, so it'll be hard to hide glue spills in this fabric. I allowed the crown of that little hat to dry, so I set that aside and went on to try another idea I had for the drawstring part of the bag. So I trimmed it off where the seam was, where the string went through the bag, and I thought it was a nice height to make the crown of another type of a hat. Now they'll both will be black, but one hat will look more like a top hat, and this one will be more the regular crown of a hat. And again, I trimmed it to size, and after trimming it, I decided to glue the seams, but I was using more of the butt seam concept. Let me show you what I mean. So I used a small piece of fabric as a tab for the inside of the crown. One, so that I don't have to overlap the fabric, and that I'll be able to easily conceal where the two pieces meet. Now here you can see I'm adding the tab, and then I'm adding additional glue and then laying the other flap on top. Now here I'm pinching it together. This fabric is synthetic, so it doesn't catch as fast as cotton fabrics, so I did end up using my little clothespins to secure it to dry. Now when the fabric that I wrapped around the cylinder was dry, I removed it from the cylinder so that I could create a piece to be the brim of the hat and a topper for the crown. Now originally I used my circle template to fit or figure out how big I needed the top to the crown to be. Now dolls, although I don't like to measure, this little circle template came in handy. Like this really helped to give me the general shape. Now I didn't do the circle perfectly. I ended up wanting a circle that was bigger than the crown of the hat so that I could glue it to the top easily and then just trim the leather. Now the crown, I made it leather. The sides of the hat are velvet. So I was definitely doing some experimentation with this process. But I think it turned out nice, so I'm going to allow it to dry before I trim it. Now I really like the firmness of these leather pieces, so I actually used it again to cut out the rim of the hat. And after cutting a circle to the size that I wanted the rim to be, I sized it to the cylinder and made another lid for the top of the other hat. After I created the circles for the rim, I used the circle template to cut out the circles for the opening to the rim of the hat. Now the upcoming footage is images of how the hats turned out after I got through doing all the things that I did. Now some of these hats looked a little bit out of scale. Some of them were larger than I thought they would be. This really didn't even look like a top hat anymore for a 12th scale doll, but I thought they were kind of cute anyway, so I persevered and continued on. I realized that even though I liked the leather, it was a little bit heavy for the look that I wanted these hats to have. Now, it worked out a little bit better when I worked with the velvet drawstring bag, so I did make a couple hats with that process, and they did come out a little bit better, a little bit more in scale. So dolls, I'm just leaving this process or this footage here so that you can see that sometimes you can have an idea or a concept and it just doesn't turn out the way you imagine in your head, but that doesn't mean that the process is hopeless. That just means that I learned something, that the leather that I was considering was too heavy. The velvet is working out even better, but it's not quite as rigid as I wanted it to be to create the shapes that I wanted to make. So I decided to use a different material. Now this hat is really cute. I think it turned out nice. I think it would be a great prop in a room or a scene. And even though I decided I really wasn't going to use the hat, I did add leather trim to finish off the rim. And in the matter of the little red plastic hat, I painted it black so that my grandsons wouldn't recognize it if they saw it in my dollhouse. So I opted for a lighter weight material, which was the watercolor paper, to make some men's hats. Now I had that first watercolor hat that I'd shown you in the beginning of the video. I did cut down the crown so that it'll be more in scale for my 12 scale men, and then I used the part of the crown that I cut off to make a different type of hat. So I set that part aside and cut out a template to make a brim in a size that would correspond with the size of the crown of the hat. And then I glued that to that part to dry. And when I cut the crowns for the next hats, I used the side of my scissors to curl the crown portion so that they'll be easy to round them out and glue the seams together to create the crown. So dolls, even though I was really fascinated with the idea and concept of using the leather, it was a lot easier to work with the watercolor paper. Although the paper was firm, it was really lightweight, easy to cut, very easy to shape and curl, and it glued together really nice with the tacky glue. And it was overall just a much easier process. Now, my biggest concern was that the hats would be so lightweight because they were all paper. And although I did use cardstock to create the hats for the dress shop, I added fabric to those hats, so they had a little bit more weight to them. But I really like the way these hats are turning out. Now here I added a crown to the top of that hat, and I added a brim to the crown that I cut off of it. So I changed one hat and ended up creating two hats. Now I didn't have any black cardstock. I actually could have painted these black or any color. Now I did add Gorilla Wood glue to fill in the gaps around the crown of that hat. And here is my plastic hat that I painted black. I did add a little cording around it to make it look like it had a band. But I thought the hats looked really cute, but I thought they needed a little detail. Now after the glue on this one dried, I painted it brown to conceal the wood glue that I used to fill the gaps. So by the time I got to this stage of creating the hats, I realized I was really pleased with everything except for the weight of the hats. I felt like they needed to be a little bit heavier. So in order to seal the paper fibers, I gave them a thin coat of matte Mod Podge, which actually added weight. Plus it made the color a little bit deeper, a little richer. Now it just needs some details. So I had the drawstring cord, a little leather, some little cording. And I really think it really brought out the style of the hat and really made the color a little bit more interesting. I definitely need to look into finding more really tiny ribbon in what I consider solid or more masculine colors. I had a lot of pink and purple and red, but not a lot of gray, black, or navy blue. So dolls, I just used what I had. It's really amazing how resourceful you can become when you're determined to finish a project. And at this point, I guess I'm treating nail art like paprika. I just put it on everything. And I thought it looked really nice on the hats. Now, when I got done with all the hats, I realized that I couldn't just have men's hats laying all over the rooming house. The ladies wouldn't be happy with that. So I decided I needed to make a rack. So I had a strip of wood that was a little bit wider than a jumbo craft stick. And I cut the rounds off of the jumbo craft stick and glued them together, and I thought that was going to make a really nice looking hat rack. Now I did bevel off the edges with sandpaper and then added 2 nice coats of my Jacobean stain. After the stain was dry, I added my hooks, and there we go, dolls. A really nice hat rack in the hallway for the men's hats. Now there's one more key thing you're going to find in a house where you find men, and that's going to be boots. Among the men, footwear is always a defining factor. So I did several different colors of clay to create these boots because I wanted there to be variation, but my concept is the same. Some I made the shaft of the boot a little higher, others I made it a little lower. Some of them I tried to make it look as though the boots were more dress boots, and other ones I tried to make them look like they were more like work boots, but I just wanted lots of boots of all different kinds. Now dolls, this image here is how I make my basic shoes for my 12 scale dolls that I make from scratch. but I've never added this much detail into the doll's shoes before. But I felt like by these shoes not being concealed under long pants or dresses, they needed to have a little bit more detail. So I added shoelace holes and wrinkles to make it look like leather. But when it was all said and done, I was really pleased with the look of my boots. I did sand them and trim off some of the burrs and things after it was baked, just to smooth it out a little bit. But I wanted them to look a little rugged. But overall, I just want to encourage you, dolls, to not be afraid to create. It doesn't have to be perfect for it to be cute. If you really look closely at a lot of mass produced things that you purchase all the time, they're not perfect. They're made by humans and they have little imperfections. And I think that's what makes them really special. So I just want you to not be afraid. Take the time to try to make something that you've never made before and see what you can do. See how far you can get. You see, I did this several different times, and even with the multitude of times, they still weren't perfect. But now let's see how cute imperfect can look. And here are my little boots dolls. They're all done, polished up, and shined. I lined them up against the wall. I think that looks a little bit more natural. There's a pair in one of the bedrooms. So here's a last look at the boots before I show you everything all together. Now, if you enjoyed this video today, definitely let me know in the comments. Also, like, share, and subscribe. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye-bye now, dolls.